The date is August 29, 1988. The air inside Madison Square Garden is electric, pulsing with the energy of 20,000 rabid wrestling fans. The inaugural SummerSlam is in full swing, the newest pay-per-view spectacle crafted to showcase the very best of the World Wrestling Federation's golden era. And standing in the center of it all, basking in the cascade of deafening jeers, is Ravishing Rick Rude, the embodiment of arrogance himself, with boos only seem to fuel him, his lips curling into a knowing sneer as he reaches for the microphone. He surveys the crowd, and with calculated disdain, he addresses them. "Cut the music," he commands before launching into his signature tirade against the fat, out-of-shape sweat hogs in attendance. He removes his lavish robe, revealing a body sculpted like a statue of ancient gods, knowing full well that his mere existence provokes both admiration and fury in equal measure. Opposite him stands the Junkyard Dog, a fan favorite with a personality as large as his physical presence. The contrast is stark: Rude, the self-absorbed Adonis, and JYD, the everyman brawler with a heart that beats for the fans. The match begins, and Rude, ever the technician, executes his offense with precision. Every punch, every maneuver is laced with a cocky swagger, a silent reminder that in his mind, he's taunting, flexing, reveling in the ire of the audience. But what happens next cements this moment as quintessential Rick Rude. Midway through the match, in a stroke of theatrical villainy, Rude tugs at his tights and reveals a second pair underneath, this one emblazoned with the face of Jake the Snake, Robert's wife. The sheer audacity of it is breathtaking. The arena erupts, the jeers morphing into something more visceral, more hateful. The psychological warfare is complete, and it doesn't take long before the inevitable happens. A furious Jake Roberts storms the ring, his rage boiling over into uncontrollable vengeance. The match is thrown out. Rude wins by disqualification, but he has achieved something far more valuable than a clean victory. He has cemented his status as one of the most despised men in professional wrestling. This moment was more than just a match. It was a masterclass in character work. Rick Rude didn't just embrace his role as a villain, he elevated it to an art form. He was more than a wrestler. He was a provocateur, a performer who understood that professional wrestling was not just about athleticism, but about eliciting emotion. In an era dominated by larger-than-life heroes, Rude made being bad look good. His persona was intoxicating, a fusion of smug self-assurance and legitimate in-ring brilliance that made him impossible to ignore. But behind the bravado, behind the perfectly sculpted body and the venomous insults, lay a man whose life would take a tragic turn. In 1999, at just 40 years old, Rick Rude tragically passed away. The question lingers: what truly led to the untimely demise of one of wrestling's most captivating figures? To understand, we must look back, beyond the glitz and glamour, to the origins of the man who would become known as Ravishing. Richard Irwin Rude was born on December 7, 1958, in St. Peter, Minnesota. He was a student at Robbinsdale High School, where he shared the halls with future wrestling greats, including Nikita Koloff, Curt Hennig, Tom Zenk, Brady Boone, John Nord, and Barry Darsow. An extraordinary assembly of talent destined for the squared circle. Among them, his bond with childhood friend Curt Hennig was particularly deep, a friendship that would endure through their rise in the wrestling world. A natural athlete, he excelled in both football and amateur wrestling. Upon earning a degree in physical education from Anoka Ramsey Community College, Rude briefly navigated the rough-and-tumble world of nightclub security as a bouncer, before testing his mettle in the competitive arena of arm wrestling. But it was professional wrestling that ultimately beckoned him. Under the tutelage of the legendary Eddie Sharkey, the same mastermind who molded the likes of Bob Backlund, the Road Warriors, Sean Waltman, Austin Aries, and Eric Rowan, Rude honed his craft with an intensity befitting his future greatness. He stepped into the ring for the first time in 1982, under the moniker Ricky Rude, a young and unproven babyface tasked with paying his dues. His televised debut came on the November 6, 1982 episode of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, where he faced the rugged and imposing Joe LeDuc, ultimately falling in defeat, a humbling start to what would become an extraordinary career. Rude began his journey in the squared circle with Vancouver's All-Star Wrestling, before making his way to Georgia Championship Wrestling, and eventually the Memphis-based Continental Wrestling Association. His official arrival on the national stage came on the May 28, 1983 episode of World Championship Wrestling, where he secured victory over Pat Rose with a well-placed dropkick. A week later, the legendary Gordon Solie conducted an interview with the rising star, during which Rude reflected on his transition from arm wrestling to professional wrestling, emphasizing his deliberate weight loss to enhance agility, an early glimpse of his meticulous dedication. In 1984, he made his triumphant return to Memphis, this time reinvented as Ravishing Rick Rude, an arrogant, self-absorbed heel whose swagger was amplified by the ever-opportunistic Jimmy Hart at his side. His bravado made him an instant antagonist, igniting heated rivalries with Jerry Lawler and later his former ally-turned-adversary, King Kong Bundy. Expanding his reach, Rude debuted in world-class championship wrestling, stepping into battle against the monstrous Kamala in a hard-fought loss before transitioning to Jim Crockett Promotions. There, alongside a revolving door of partners, he waged war against the Road Warriors, one of the most dominant duos in wrestling history. In December 1984, Championship Wrestling from Florida brought in Rude, pairing him with the cunning Percy Pringle as his manager. His rise was swift, as on January 16, 1985, he overpowered Pez Whatley to claim the Florida Southern Heavyweight Championship. However, his reign was cut short on April 10th, when Brian Blair wrested the title from him. Undeterred, Rude reclaimed the gold on July 20th, defeating Mike Graham in the finals of a Southern title tournament. His second run lasted until October 2nd, when he fell to Wahoo McDaniel, the man shaping Florida's booking at the time. Beyond singles gold, Rude found success in the tag team ranks alongside Jesse Barr. On April 16, 1985, the duo seized the Florida United States Tag Team Championship, igniting a fierce rivalry with Billy Jack Haynes and Wahoo McDaniel. Their battles raged until July 9th, when McDaniel and Haynes pried the belts from their grasp, closing the chapter on Rude's eventful run in Florida. In October of 1985, Rude stormed into world-class championship wrestling alongside Percy Pringle, immediately clashing with Kevin Von Erich and Chris Adams. His impact was undeniable, as by November 4th he had captured the American Heavyweight Championship, solidifying himself as a top star in the territory. After dropping the title to Chris Adams in July 1986, tensions boiled over. Rude unceremoniously dumped Pringle, replacing him, albeit briefly, with his sister Raven. He then formed a powerhouse duo with the Dingo Warrior, but the alliance was short-lived as Warrior ultimately betrayed him, embracing the fans and forging his own legend. In September 1986, Rude made his return to Jim Crockett Promotions, aligning with the rugged Manny Fernandez and their devious manager Paul Jones to wage war against Wahoo McDaniel. Together, Rude and Fernandez, dubbed the Awesome Twosome, quickly made their mark. On December 6, 1986, they dethroned the Rock and Roll Express to claim the prestigious World Tag Team Championship, cementing themselves as one of the most dominant duos in the promotion. Their reign was fierce but short-lived. In April 1987, Rude abruptly made his exit for the World Wrestling Federation, forcing Jim Crockett Jr. to scramble for an explanation. In a clever bit of storytelling, the promotion aired a pre-taped, non-title match where the Rock and Roll Express emerged victorious, with the narrative spun that Rude had suffered an injury, an excuse that masked his high-profile jump to Vince McMahon's empire. Rick Rude made his grand entrance in the Federation on July 15, 1987, debuting on Superstars of Wrestling as the newest and most arrogant member of the Bobby Heenan family. With Heenan in his corner, Rude immediately set his sights on Mr. Wonderful Paul Orndorff. What followed was a heated battle of egos, as Orndorff sought to prove he was still the dominant force, while Rude aimed to establish himself as Heenan's new crown jewel. Their rivalry reached its climax inside the hallowed halls of Madison Square Garden, where Rude triumphed over Orndorff, solidifying his place as one of the Federation's fastest-rising villains. Rude then kicked off 1988 with a bold challenge, stepping into the Boston Garden on January 9th to face Hulk Hogan for the World Heavyweight Championship. Though he fell short in dethroning the Hulkster, this was merely the prelude to one of his most iconic feuds, his war with Jake the Snake Roberts. A master of mind games and arrogance, Rude perfected a pre-match ritual designed to enrage the audience. With theatrical flair, he would slowly remove his robe after berating the local crowd, branding the men as fat, out-of-shape sweat hogs. Oftentimes, he took his arrogance a step further, selecting a lucky woman from the audience, courtesy of Bobby Heenan, and sealing the moment with a smug, show-stealing kiss. One of Rude's most infamous trademarks was his custom airbrushed tights, each pair a canvas for his conceitful taunting. But in his bitter feud with Jake the Snake Roberts, those tights became a weapon of pure humiliation. In a moment that blurred reality and storyline, Rude unknowingly attempted to seduce Roberts' real-life wife, Cheryl, during his pre-match routine. When she rejected his advances and revealed she was there for the Snake, Rude's ego took a hit. Enraged, especially after Cheryl slapped him, he grabbed her wrist and berated her on the microphone. That was all the provocation Roberts needed, as he stormed out of the dressing room and erupted into a brawl with Rude. Days later, Rude delivered his ultimate insult. He strutted to the ring, wearing tights airbrushed with Cheryl's face, a move designed to enrage Roberts beyond reason. Soon a furious Snake hit the ring like a man possessed, attacking Rude and tearing off his tights. For television audiences, the Federation censored Rude's lower half with a blacked-out spot, creating the illusion that he had been left completely exposed. But for the live crowd, the reality was slightly less scandalous, with Rude having been stripped down to nothing but a G-string. By mid-1988, Rude had fully embraced his mind games, making a habit of wearing a second pair of tights beneath the ones he entered the ring with, always saving a shocking reveal for the perfect moment. As highlighted earlier, at the inaugural SummerSlam, he took this tactic to another level during his match against the Junkyard Dog. As Rude was perched on the top turnbuckle, he peeled off his outer tights to expose a second pair, this time featuring Cheryl Roberts' face. The blatant disrespect sent Jake the Snake Roberts into a frenzy. Chaos, the referee disqualified Junkyard Dog, handing Rude the victory. Their rivalry raged on, culminating in a Rude Awakening versus DDT match at Madison Square Garden, where Roberts emerged victorious. The final chapter came at the 1988 Survivor Series, when Roberts put an emphatic end to their war, dropping Rude with a DDT and pinning him clean. Rude's next spiteful saga erupted with the Ultimate Warrior, a clash of power, ego, and raw intensity. The feud ignited at the 1989 Royal Rumble, where the two met in a super pose down, a contest designed to showcase their chiseled physiques. Warrior, the fan favorite, had the crowd firmly in his corner, much to Rude's growing frustration. When it became clear he was losing the popularity battle, Rude snapped. In a moment of calculated brutality, he blindsided Warrior, smashing him across the back with a steel pose bar. The attack left Warrior writhing in pain and set the stage for one of the most heated rivalries of the year. This led to a high-stakes Intercontinental Championship match at WrestleMania 5 with the Ultimate Warrior defending his title against the cunning Rude. The match erupted before it even began, as Rude attempted a sneak attack, only to injure his knee on the Warrior's unyielding championship belt. What followed was a brutal back and forth, with Rude using every dirty trick in the book, from missile dropkicks to jawbreakers, but the Warrior seemed impervious to his offense. However, after a dramatic turn of events, it was Heenan's interference that allowed Rude to capitalize and claim the belt, securing the pinfall on the weakened Warrior. Although it wasn't long before Warrior would extract his revenge at SummerSlam. During the match, the Warrior dominated early, launching Rude with a press slam onto the arena floor and using the Intercontinental belt in a relentless assault, until Rude regained control with a well-timed counter. However, a timely distraction from Roddy Piper, who flashed Rude with his kilt, gave the Warrior the opening he needed, leading to a German suplex, press slam, Warrior splash, and a victorious pinfall, making him the new Intercontinental Champion. Rude then set his sights on Piper, culminating in a heated clash at the 1989 Survivor Series, where their teams collided in a chaotic battle. The rivalry raged on with several encounters, including a steel cage match at Madison Square Garden, where Rude found himself on the losing end of most bouts. He briefly turned his attention to Jimmy Snuka, securing a victory over him at WrestleMania 6, before his focus shifted once more. In the summer of 1990, Rude reignited his rivalry with the Ultimate Warrior, following Warrior's triumph as Federation Champion. Determined to claim the title, Rude embraced an intense training regimen, cutting ties with distractions, forsaking women, and opting for a more disciplined short-haired look that would define his later years. The culmination of this personal transformation came at SummerSlam, where the two collided in a brutal steel cage match. But despite Rude's preparations, the Warrior emerged victorious once again. Rude's next scheduled feud was with the Big Boss Man. sparked by his manager Bobby Heenan's inflammatory remarks about Bossman's mother. Rude eagerly backed up these insults, challenging the Bossman to a showdown. Scheduled for a Survivor Series match as part of the Natural Disasters, alongside Earthquake, Dino Bravo, and the Barbarian, Rude was unexpectedly replaced by Haku after being suspended indefinitely by Jack Tunney. Tunney explained that the suspension was a result of Rude's disrespectful comments, with Heenan being forced to step in and face the Bossman. In reality, Rude's departure was prompted by an escalating dispute with Federation owner Vince McMahon, leading to his exit from the company. After leaving the Federation, Rude sought to join the Universal Wrestling Federation, but his former employer quickly intervened, sending a cease and desist order that blocked his appearance on television while still under contract. It wasn't until May 1991, at the Spring Spectacular 2, that Rude made his in-ring return, facing Paul Orndorff and losing by disqualification. 2 months later, he ventured overseas to All Japan Pro Wrestling for their Summer Action Series, making his debut in Yokosuka, Japan, where he formed a successful partnership with Johnny Ace, defeating Billy Black and Joel Deaton. Rude remained undefeated in singles matches, claiming victories over Isamu Teranishi and Akira Taue, before wrapping up his tour with a loss alongside Johnny Ace to Dan Spivey and Stan Hansen. Rude also made notable appearances in International World Class Championship Wrestling, engaging in a feud with the Honky Tonk Man. In late 1991, Rude made his return to World Championship Wrestling, which had been sold to Ted Turner in late 1988. His reappearance at Halloween Havoc was shrouded in mystery as he donned the mask of the Phantom, only to reveal his identity later that evening. Rude quickly established himself as a force, leading the Dangerous Alliance, a faction that included Medusa, Arn Anderson, Bobby Eaton, Larry Zbyszko, and stunning Steve Austin. Rude claimed the United States Heavyweight Championship from Sting on November 19, 1991, and embarked on a series of intense rivalries, including a feud with Ricky Steamboat, during which Steamboat suffered a kayfabe broken nose in a brutal gang attack. In 1992, Rude and Medusa parted ways with the Dangerous Alliance to feud with Nikita Koloff. Rude, who had set his sights on the World Heavyweight Championship, challenged Ron Simmons multiple times but never captured the title. And in December, Rude sustained a legitimate neck injury, forcing him to forfeit the United States Championship and ending a historic 14-month reign, the second longest in the title's history. Rude returned to action in April 1993, seeking to reclaim the title from Dustin Rhodes, who had won it in his absence. Their rivalry, marked by controversial finishes, culminated in a 30-minute Iron Man match at Beach Blast, which ended in a draw, leading to a best-of-3 series. Rude won the first match, but was then defeated twice by Rhodes, ultimately losing his chance to regain the United States Heavyweight Championship. Next, Rude set his sights on the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, making a bold statement during Ric Flair's A Flair for the Gold segment. He defeated Flair for the title at Fall Brawl that September, but when WCW severed ties with the NWA, the company introduced the International World Heavyweight Championship. Rude briefly held this title, losing it to Hiroshi Hase in Tokyo before regaining it a week later in Kyoto. After a string of title changes, a serious back injury sustained during a match with Sting led to Rude's retirement shortly after being stripped of the championship. After collecting on a Lloyd's of London insurance policy, Rude remained absent from wrestling until January 1997, when he resurfaced in Extreme Championship Wrestling as a masked figure. His debut at House Party saw him declare his intention to mess with the franchise, and he spent the following months tormenting Shane Douglas, even spanking his valet Francine during crossing the line again. Rude eventually unmasked, transitioning to a color commentator role before briefly aligning with Douglas and his Triple Threat faction. In the main event of Heatwave, Rude made a one-off return to the ring in a 6-man tag, only to betray his partners, Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman, later aiding Jerry Lawler in defeating them. In August of 1997, Rude made his return to the World Wrestling Federation, aligning himself as the insurance policy for the faction that would come to be known as D-Generation X, alongside Shawn Michaels, Triple H, and Chyna. While Rude never wrestled as a member of DX, he played an integral role, standing ringside during the group's matches. Just days after the controversial Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series, Rude departed the Federation once again. According to Bret Hart, Rude stayed in the locker room during Hart's confrontation with Vince McMahon and later informed Eric Bischoff that the events were genuine. Though Rude was not under a full-time contract with the Federation, working instead on a pay-per-appearance basis, his anger over the screw job led him to negotiate a deal with Bischoff and World Championship Wrestling. On November 17, 1997, Rude made history by appearing on both Raw is War and Monday Nitro in the same night. On Nitro, with a mustache, Rude harshly criticized Vince McMahon, Shawn Michaels, DX, and the Federation, referring to the company as the Titanic, a pointed jab at Titan Sports, the Federation's parent company at the time. Just an hour later, Rude appeared on Raw is War, now sporting the full beard he had worn in his final weeks with the Federation. Over that same weekend, Rude made an appearance on Extreme Championship Wrestling's Hardcore TV, further blurring the lines between the promotions, as the Federation and ECW often collaborated in talent exchanges. In WCW, Rude joined the New World Order, managing his close friend Curt Hennig and becoming the first wrestler to be part of both DX and NWO. When the NWO splintered in May 1998, Rude and Hennig initially aligned with the Wolfpack, but their time with the faction was short-lived. At the Great American Bash, they betrayed Wolfpack member Conan after his loss to the undefeated Goldberg, leading them to join NWO Hollywood. By the end of 1998, both men were sidelined with injuries, Hennig suffering from a persistent leg injury, and Rude initially thought to have testicular cancer, later diagnosed with a spermatocele. Hennig returned to the NWO at Starrcade, but Rude remained absent due to his health issues, ultimately leaving the promotion in April 1999 after his final appearance on the April 5th edition of Monday Nitro Backstage Blast. Just over 2 weeks later, on April 20th, 1999, Rude was found unconscious by his wife and tragically passed away at the age of 40 from heart failure. The cause was seemingly a lethal mix of prescription painkillers and anabolic steroids, a cocktail all too familiar in the world of professional wrestling. At the time, Rude had been actively training for a return to the ring. It was later speculated that the effects of gamma-hydroxybutyrate, a drug used to treat narcolepsy, may have played a role in his untimely passing. The legacy of Ravishing Rick Rude is one of brilliance and tragedy. He was, without question, one of the greatest villains the business has ever seen. A man who understood, perhaps better than anyone, how to manipulate an audience, how to make them feel, how to make them hate him. His matches, his promos, his very presence demanded attention. He was, in every sense of the word, ravishing. And beneath the bombastic exterior was a man of unshakable grit. Rude wasn't just a pretty face with a sculpted physique. He was a relentless worker, his training regimen forging an iron grip that could humble the toughest challengers. And when provoked, he didn't hesitate to back up his words with his fists. In one infamous backstage clash, Rude is said to have dropped the Ultimate Warrior with a single punch, proof that the Ravishing One was every bit as dangerous as he was charismatic. The late great Paul Bearer, then known as Percy Pringle, once revealed one of Rick Rude's more peculiar indulgences. As recounted by Bruce Pritchard on Something to Wrestle, Rude and his girlfriend would frequent bars, but not just for drinks. He took a twisted pleasure in watching other men hit on her, knowing full well what came next. The moment some poor fool took the bait, Rude would step in, eager to turn the flirtation into a full-blown brawl. For him, it wasn't just about proving a point, it was about the thrill of domination. And then there's also the tale where one night, despite nursing an injured arm, Rude joined his WCW crew for a night out. When a bouncer foolishly dismissed the wrestlers as phonies, Rude didn't just put him in his place, he dropped him. And to drive the point home, he did it with his injured arm, proving that even at half strength, he was more than most men could handle. After Rude's passing, Bret Hart said, "Rick Rude was anything but rude. In any circle of friends and phonies, you take the good with the bad, and the bad makes you appreciate the good even more." At the height of my road days, when 300 flights in 300 towns a year was normal, strangers became family and family became strangers. You can't pick your family, but you can pick your friends. Rick Rude was one of the best picks I ever made. He was a great family man. He loved his wife. He was one of those kind of guys who never took his wedding ring off. He put a white piece of tape around it when he went into the ring. He was the kind of guy that when you needed someone to back you up, he wouldn't flinch at all. Not for money, not for anything. In 2017, Rude was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame, cementing his legacy as one of the most iconic figures in professional wrestling history. But the tragedy of his death lingers, a cruel punctuation mark on a career that deserved a far greater epilogue. Rick Rude was one of a kind, a performer whose impact far outlived his time in the ring. He was arrogance personified, a villain in the purest sense, and yet decades later, his legacy is one of admiration. Because deep down, even as we booed, even as we jeered, we knew that we were watching a master at work. May he rest in peace,